Eden Hazard went from being the best player in the Premier League to an overweight player who can't get a game for his club. But he's not the only football player who fell off that hard. One star player got banned from even entering his team's training ground, and another quit football when he walked in on his wife banging another dude. But before we get to those, one phone call turned Adriano from Brazil's star boy into an alcoholic playing amateur football in America. Adriano was on top of the world at Inter Milan. He was the future of Brazil, set to take the crown off Ronaldo Nazario. 26 goals in his first season with Inter, and man looked unstoppable. But at the end of 2004, something happened that completely derailed the Brazilian's career. Adriano was with the Inter squad when he received a phone call from Brazil. His father had suddenly died. He hung up the phone and fell to the floor, which was the turning point in his career. He fell into a depression and turned to partying and alcohol. His performances began to fade as the drinking got more intense. Come 2009, he was shipped off from Inter Milan, unable to get his life together. He bounced from club to club, but with each club came the same old story of parties and alcohol getting in the way of football. He fell so far down the footballing ladder that he ended up signing for American non-league side Miami United, where he only lasted 6 months before finally calling it quits. But that's only one player who fell off from the top of their game. You still have to hear about the player who stabbed his cousin at a family gathering, and the player who quit football when he walked in on his wife banging another dude. But before we get to those, Eden Hazard went from being the best player in the Premier League to an overweight reserve who couldn't get a game for Real Madrid. Man fell off hard. Hazard spent 7 seasons in the Premier League where he dominated, picking up 16 goals and 15 assists in just his final season for Chelsea. This caused Real Madrid to pull the trigger and drop 120 million euros to sign the Belgian winger. But Hazard must have let the big money move get to his head because he showed up at Real Madrid 6 kilograms overweight. But after a couple of games, he wished the weight would be his only problem because in a match against PSG, he picked up an ankle injury which would mark the end of the Hazard we knew and loved. In the 4 years that followed, Hazard was a constant reserve, picking up injury after injury and still failing to control his weight. He only managed to bag a total of 3 league goals in his time in Madrid until Real finally released him from the club in 2023. But at least Hazard was allowed into training because Jadon Sancho has been banned from even entering the Man United training ground since manager Erik ten Hag says he's too toxic to have around the rest of the team. Man United bought Jadon Sancho for 100 million euros when he was seen as the best young talent in the world, but after a couple of years in England, Sancho hasn't lived up to the hype he built up in Germany. One poor performance after another, and Erik ten Hag had enough, started leaving him out of the squad and blamed it on his performances in training. But instead of working hard to prove the manager wrong, Sancho threw his toys out of the pram and took to social media to say that he's being scapegoated. The relationship just fell apart even further from there, with Sancho refusing to apologize and Ten Hag refusing to let him train with the first team. It's now almost certain that Sancho will leave the club in the next transfer window. But at least Sancho's downfall isn't linked to any crimes, like Quincy Promes, who went from being one of the best players in Ajax to a convicted felon for stabbing his own cousin. Promes was living in Amsterdam and attended a family gathering. During this gathering, Promes and his cousin got into an argument, which resulted in a stabbing. Promes was taken to court but was allowed to carry on his football career until a verdict was reached. He then transferred from Ajax to Moscow, knowing that if he was living in Russia, he would be safe from the Dutch police. A verdict was reached and Promes was convicted with attempted murder and sentenced to 18 months in prison, but he didn't show up to the trial as he continued to hide out in Russia where the Dutch police can't get to him. Although he is free living in Russia, he will never be able to return to top-flight football, meaning his talent will be wasted in a weaker league just to avoid getting his ass thrown in jail. But at least he has the support of the Russian fans because Dele Alli doesn't even get support from his own fans. Dele Alli fell off so hard that he went from being the future of the England national team to being booed off the pitch by his own fans in the Turkish league. But how did this happen? In 2016, Dele Alli signed for Tottenham Hotspur and quickly became one of the best players in the Premier League. He was named Young Player of the Season on 2 separate occasions and was linked to the biggest clubs in the world at the time. But once the Spurs manager got sacked, it all went to shit for Dele. Mourinho came in and tried the tough love treatment, but Alli just seemed to lose his focus for football. A mix of bad influences and a traumatic childhood meant he didn't have the strength to fight for his place and ended up getting offloaded to Everton. This didn't last long, as he fell even further down the footballing ladder, ending up in Besiktas a couple of years later. His performances have gotten so bad that even the Besiktas fans have been literally booing him off the pitch. But Paul Pogba isn't even allowed on the pitch because Pogba was once the best midfielder in the world, and now, after his family turned on him trying to ruin Mbappe's life and facing a 4-year ban from football, it looks like Pogba's career is all over. When Pogba signed for United at a world record 100 million euros, he was considered the best midfielder in the world. His time at Old Trafford wasn't the best, as he picked up injury after injury, but managed to achieve success with France during that time. But when he finally returned back to Juventus, that's when everything fell apart. The injury problems he had at United didn't go away, but Pogba wishes injuries were the biggest problems that he would face. In August 2023, Pogba's brother Matthias shocked the world when he announced to the public that Pogba had been seeing a witch doctor and was attempting to put a curse on Kylian Mbappe. He was jealous of his French teammates' growing popularity and wanted to ruin his career by dropping a spell on the striker. But that's not all Matthias Pogba did, because a year earlier, Paul arrived home to find 2 hooded men with assault rifles who stole his phone and ordered him to pay 14 million euros in exchange for his life. It was later found out that Pogba's brother was a part of this group of men and was arrested. But it got worse for Pogba, because late in 2023, he was picked up for a random doping test, and it was found that Paul had unusually high testosterone levels, meaning he's facing a 4-year ban from football, which would mark the end of Paul's playing career. It must hurt when family betrays you, but Josip Ilicic faced the worst betrayal possible. He flew home to surprise his wife to find her banging another man. Back in 2020, Ilicic was banging in goals for Atalanta and was one of their most important players. He was a family man. He and his wife had 2 kids, but they were living in Slovenia whilst Ilicic was playing football in Italy. So when the pandemic hit, Ilicic wasn't able to see his family. After lockdown, Ilicic got the green light to fly home and decided to surprise his wife. He arrived home, walked in the door, and found another man with his wife. This broke him. The woman he loved for 10 years and the mother of his children had just betrayed him. This sent Ilicic into a dark depression, and he was ready to quit football forever. He took a year off, left Atalanta, and signed for Maribor in Slovenia. This year out of football took a toll on him both mentally and physically, as he just couldn't control his weight. Ilicic fell off for being one of the best strikers in Italy, banging in goals in the Champions League, to a chubby striker battling with depression. That's really heartbreaking, but if you want to hear about the most heartbreaking moment in Ronaldo's life, or about the goalkeeper who got booed off the pitch the day his brother died, you have to check out this video now.